Hi, everybody. Welcome again to another episode of the ShopNotes Podcast. I'm your host, Phil, joined with Logan and special guest Mike Pekovich. Today, we're going to talk about design, the woodworker's journey, cooking, music, all that kind of stuff. Wanted to recognize today's episode is sponsored by Shaper Tools. They're the makers of the Shaper Origin. It's that handheld CNC that brings digital precision to the craft of woodworking. You can tackle joinery, cabinetry, hardware installation, and more with speed and precision. Try it risk-free in your shop for 30 days. Visit shapertools.com to learn more. Well, thanks, Mike, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, we wanted to... Wow.
I had to use it once, right?
We wanted to return the favor since you guys sent Ben out here a couple years ago, so we could do that. And
but then you sent him back to us, so I don't know what happened.
Yeah, right. That was the thing, is like it was more of an escape as sent back, maybe. I think that's probably a better descriptor of it. So what I wanted to talk to you about, Mike, is maybe a little bit of your backstory, origin story on how a West Coast rocker turns into an East Coast furniture maker with a penchant for quiet design.
Huh. Okay. That there's a lot to unpack there, I suppose. We can make it pretty quick. I started furniture making in college, in art school. At that same time, I had kind of picked up music and had been doing a band concurrently with making furniture. So I figured at some point one of those things was eventually going to win out. And I thought, well, this is back when 45 was considered ancient. So I said, like, as a 20-something, I said, I can be 45 and make furniture. I can't be 45 and still be an aspiring rock star. Like, that was over the hill. So I just, after I graduated, I just basically pursued music kind of through my 20s. And then I realized that I needed to get a real job at some point. I went back to school for graphic design, and all the while my machines and stuff that I'd collected during furniture making in college were kind of living in my parents' garage and in storage and stuff. So I'd gotten back into woodworking when I got back into graphic design and got a job as a graphic designer, woodworking on the side, and that led to a job at Fine Woodworking Magazine as I came in as an associate art director. And the ad at the time that I saw in the magazine was associate art director must have woodworking and computer graphics experience. And this was 1996. So this was pre-internet. This was pre-web designer, pre-anything. So I basically figured I was the only person in the world with computer graphics and woodworking experience. And that turned out to be the case because I got the job. So apparently I was a competition one. And and I've been at Fine Woodworking ever since, about 25 years. And it was like, at the time, it was not a smart career move. It was not a strategic career move because I was in Southern California working for Vans, the skate shoe company, as a graphic designer. And that was like a pretty hip and cool job. So, leaving there to go to Connecticut to work for Woodworking Magazine had a lot of people scratching their heads. And I probably myself too at a certain point, but I'd always had a passion for woodworking and furniture making. So I didn't know how or why, but I just knew that coming to Fine Woodworking Magazine was somehow going to forward my woodworking pursuits, I guess. I didn't know
Sure.
how, but I basically took it as I came in to the magazine and basically decided to relearn the craft of woodworking from the ground up. Because in college, I was taking woodworking within the art department, so it was very much design intensive. And the idea was that you were supposed to design something and then invent the joinery with which to hold all the parts together. So it was a very non-traditional situation. And in California, with the really constant temperature and humidity levels, wood movement was just a theory. It's just like, yeah, I know. But so when I came to Connecticut and I heard all these pops and cracks in the middle of the night when all of my California-made furniture started shrinking and pulling apart, and once the heat came on in Connecticut, it's like, okay, this is a real thing. And so I basically said, put the design aside, because up to that point, I loved the design part. The building part was horrible. That was just like a chain around my ankle, keeping me from designing the next project. So it was like, design it, great. Okay, now I got to make the thing. Okay, then I get to design something else. And so I really came at it just basically saying, okay, put design aside. Why don't you sort of kind of start from scratch and relearn how to woodwork from a traditional sense? And so that started with a lot of articles, by the authors that write for the magazine. Chris Bexford and Garrett Hack were basically my unofficial mentors in terms of really learning the basics of just how to build correctly. And then coming to Connecticut, falling in love with Shaker furniture. You've seen pictures of it. I've seen pictures in like catalogs and that kind of stuff, but it was always out of context. It was always a piece of furniture just sort of on its own. But then when I had a chance to visit the Shaker Village in Shaker Village in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where there's these beautiful buildings, beautiful landscapes, and then these rooms populated with this furniture and little stoves, and you really got to see that the furniture was really part of a much bigger story. It was really, I got to see that in context and understood it a lot better. In a way, it was like when I went to the Gamble House in Pasadena when I was studying furniture making in Southern California. A fantastic house designed by Green Brothers, and you got to see a house designed in a certain way with furniture designed for it, and you really got a sense that furniture didn't exist in a vacuum, that it can really contribute to the overall sense of space and sense of place that you're creating. And I think as far removed as Shaker furniture was from Green furniture, I saw that same continuity of place and furniture and architecture, how they all sort of inform each other. And I had already had some knowledge of and a passion for arts and crafts furniture. So really, it was kind of like Shaker and arts and crafts furniture were what was really driving me for a while and sustained me for many years. And then even as I sort of started to quote unquote design furniture again, it was very much from those roots.
Sure. Now, as you develop your style, were there pieces where you could identify like this one was a growth area, kind of the mutant form that it like developed some characteristics that you knew that you were going to start to incorporate later on?
Definitely, yeah. When I sort of actually, I think we were doing an article on digital photography, and I did a sidebar on what you can do with your digital photographs once you took them, like what you can put a portfolio together or make a website. So I had sort of accumulated all the things I've been making. I've been doing commission work pretty much nonstop since coming out to Connecticut. And when I looked at all of my work together, it was a real mishmash. There was like Shaker stuff, there was arts and crafts stuff, there was sort of contemporary Shaker stuff, there's sort of almost federal. It was basically whatever the client wanted, whatever page of the Pottery Barn catalog they had happened to turn to, and that's what I was making. So there was, it wasn't that I wasn't proud of what I was making, but I looked at it and said, there's no there. There's nothing there that really I can put my finger on if someone was saying, what kind of furniture do you make? I didn't know what that was, and I didn't know what to do with that per se. A really formative piece is we were doing an article on hanging up cabinets, and we needed an example of a cabinet that hung up on a French cleat. So we're always looking for excuses to get out and shop and make something. So I volunteered to make something super quick, little wall cabinet with I think it had a couple drawers and some shelves and some dovetails to hold everything together, and really made it without thought. It was really about having a French pleat and not worrying about how it necessarily looked. And sort of when it was done, and I kind of stepped back and look at it, and it was like, there it is. That kind of describes what I'm up to. So it's this notion of trying to get to a point where I'm not consciously designing in any specific style. And so what it really left was not an empty canvas, but really I think what it left with was sort of all the residue of influence from the pieces I built in the past certainly informed how I approach furniture, what I was after. But I think just the fact of not consciously designing in a certain style, it kind of created this kind of neutral space to move forward with. And for me, it was the idea of limiting variables. So this case had dovetails at the corners that kind of stuck out a little bit. It had wherever the elements met, the shelf to the side to top and bottom, there's a slight offset. Okay, there's a drawer, a couple dovetail drawers and some shelves. And it's just like, all right, those are your variables. That's what you get to work with.
Sure.
And by the way, if you want to add a door, you can add a door. So it was just like that's it. Kind of those are the ones and zeros of my design. The idea that refrain from consciously going in a certain direction and limiting to a certain really strict minimum of variables, and then realizing even within that, there's still a world of things that you can make without having to move too far away from that. So that cabinet really pointed me in the right direction. And then also, I had made a little, we had a little cabinet with our TV on top and a VCR, and they both wouldn't fit. So I went to Home Depot, got a 1x12, cut it up, and made just sort of a U-shaped stand with just big crude dovetails on the sides. I didn't finish it. I didn't even glue it together. I just stuck it on there, put the VCR underneath and the TV on top. And that piece, actually, it's still in our house and it's still getting used. It's sort of morphed from being a TV stand to a step stool in the bathroom to a little perch for laundry baskets in the basement next to the washer dryer to now it's a perch again for a TV with an Xbox down below it. So
sure.
It was this notion of how is this thing that I just threw together, how is this still in use? How does this still have a useful life and things that I had really poured my ego into in college in these pieces, and they're like relegated to a dusty corner of the basement because I can't bear to cut them up or give them away. So it's this notion of not building just with the sense of something that lasts a long time, which we're all, I think, we're tied into that. But this notion, how do I build something that has a long, useful life to it? And I didn't quite, again, it's like, okay, think of it, that's cool, put it away because I didn't know what to do with it. But what it really began to speak to was this notion of if something is going to have a long life, then the newness of it, that moment when it's brand new, can't be the ideal, because if I make a piece with dovetails and I plane them perfectly flat and flush, after the first heating season, they're going to stick out a little bit and it's going to be imperfect. So basically, I made something that lasts 200 years. It was new for 6 months and it's old for 199 and a half years. That bothered me a lot. So looking at arts and crafts furniture, looking at older pieces of furniture, they still felt really fresh and new, where an old Federal piece with the yellow banding and the buckled veneers just looked like an old brown piece of furniture, where the arts and crafts piece was still kind of holding its own. And I think that a lot of the reason why is that the typical stickly piece will have joinery, which is proud. It does have the offsets between the components. So basically its essence is sort of built into the core, into the skeleton of the piece, into the structure, so that even if the finish gets dinged up, the essence of the piece is there. It's this notion of, okay, so if the dovetails are eventually going to stick out, make them stick out. If the parts are eventually going to be misaligned, intentionally make them misaligned to begin with. So it's this notion of not fighting what time and wear does to a piece of furniture, but embracing that, anticipating that, and in essence, building with this notion of that I'm building imperfections in. Like, hey, if time is going to do this, I'm going to beat it to the punch. I'm going to make these things uneven to begin with. And in that way, the character of the piece is consistent from the time it's made to 5 years to 10 years to 50 years later. All those parts are still going to be offset in the way that they were intended to be when it was built. So I think more than anything else, that philosophy, that newness is not an ideal, it's just sort of a blip on the timeline,
Sure.
is a really important thing that drives a lot of my work. So I'd say it's not specific design details I'm hoping to incorporate. I think it's just being consistent with a core set of philosophies, which drives basically how my furniture ends up looking.
Cool. Well, I think what's kind of fun full disclosure, I'm pretty sure that all of us in the woodworking publication realm secretly or not so secretly spy on each other. Is the idea, since I've been following you, is to see how your inspiration changes, where I see you coming up with projects kind of on a need basis, but I also see, and in woodworking, especially with our magazines, we're presenting projects as kind of a still life of a given project. And we try to be exact with dimensions and numbers and all that sort of thing. But when we're building projects for ourselves, and Logan and I see this because we're in the shop together all the time, but being able to, kind of, like I said, spy on you, is to see like you finding inspiration in like flea market finds and, leftover props from classes and all that kind of stuff. Do you struggle with that sometimes in wanting to be real rigid in, having a plan before you get into the shop versus getting into the shop and improvising a little bit, so to speak?
Yes, that's a huge question. And I think if you make furniture, there's probably not a single right answer to that.
Right.
So at the magazine, so our magazine is basically reader written. So the idea is that we're going to get someone from the outside to build a piece of furniture for us. We'll document it and hopefully come up with the correct dimensions. But the idea is that ideally the stories coming into the magazine are coming in from the outside. So that I found my place was to kind of fill in any gaps. Like, we just haven't had anybody do a straight up shaker style chest of drawers in a long time. Or I've looked at dozens of Chris Bexford articles, who's a master of shaker furniture in that style, and also just a master of really fundamental building techniques. And in reading a dozen of his articles, there were a ton of fantastic techniques that were sort of spread out and really difficult for anybody to find. So I think the first project article I did was a shaker chest of drawers in cherry. So design-wise, I wanted to be real meat and potatoes, not, macaroni and cheese with jalapenos and cream cheese in it, but just straight up mac and cheese or straight up meatloaf, like straight up shaker chest of drawers. So it was definitely, not my own design sensibility, my own ego. I just wanted to build something that if someone was looking for something to build, they would look at that and say, oh yeah, that's what I want to make. And then within that, try to basically catalog really, really smart, useful ways to go about building, which I think would hopefully benefit the reader. So that was kind of in the beginning, that was my take. So I would do shaker chest of drawers, arts and crafts pieces here and there. And then I sort of like to get a little bit subversive about it. where I had done a chimney cupboard. I love the chimney cupboard form, which was two drawers stacked on top of each other. And I love the bigger case pieces that often had a waist of drawers in sort of an asymmetric style. I loved that. That killed me. So when I made a chimney cupboard, I said, well, this is maybe not historically accurate, but I'm going to make a chimney cupboard with a waist of drawers in there too, just because they were super, super cool. So the idea wasn't to make something that didn't look shaky or correct, but it was sort of to instill kind of my own passion and sensibility, things that I was super excited about in that piece. And that was probably a transition to, so a lot of the pieces I made specifically for the magazine, I wanted to be in a style that a lot of people would like to build, and all of the processes need to be super, super sound, because anything we show in the magazine, I'm sure you're the same way. If I'm showing any technique, I am by default recommending this technique to you. And the fact that we have outside authors that really, we give you tons and tons of techniques, and we like different novel techniques as long as they're serving the reader. So that aspect of building in a very sound manner and having them build something that they would actually like to build has been super important. And what I started doing was I stopped doing commission work, sort of involuntarily, just about 2008. I'm not sure what happened around 2008, but people stopped ordering furniture that they could no longer afford because they didn't have jobs anymore. So I started that coincided with finally revamping my garage shop into a true 4-season shop with good light, a real floor, good heat in the wintertime. And I really, when I started working my own shop, it made me realize that when I was at Fine Woodworking, working in the Fine Woodworking shop, how much I was working under the mantle of what a proper fine woodworking piece should be. And when I got into my shop, I started to work on more personal things, with the idea being that, hey, no one can see me working here. I'm going to make what I want to make. I don't care if it's an article. I don't care if he likes it. I'm just making it for myself, and I'm going to keep it secret because I kind of don't even want to show people. And then, of course, when I show people, it's like, oh, why don't you do an article on that? So I think that's where my more sort of, I don't know if it's a personal style or lack of style, started to then invest itself into my pieces in the magazine. And so this is like a really roundabout answer, and you can cut answers down, right? You just like delete.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I'm saying,
yeah, totally.
Actually answering the question. So your question, about influences and whether I'm going into the shop, knowing exactly what I'm going to be making. I would say that I always have an idea. I think it's in fact, I think it's tremendously important to have an idea of where you're going. That doesn't necessarily mean, complete full-size plans with every joint figured out. It just means you know where the end point is, what you're shooting for. And a lot of the pieces I make in my shop, I'm going in with that idea and working towards that idea. And I'm super free and super loose, and it's super quick and really intuitive. And I say, I'm not shooting anything, I'm not building this for anything. I'm just making it for myself. I don't even know what these dimensions are. And so those things sort of become, I kind of refer to them as studies. They're not prototypes, they're a real thing, but it's a way to be really fluid and really creative to, hold up 4 pieces and say, is this tall enough? Is it wide enough? Is it too deep? And it says, no, it's an inch too high. And then rather than sweat it out, cut an inch off and like keep going. Like there's no downside to it. It's not a commission piece. Because when I was doing commission work, you get really nervous and you want to be super accurate and super correct, and you want to give people something really, really nice. And then you're always working with their voices in your head. And I tended to be pretty conservative with what I was making, and it wasn't that the final product was incorrect, but it was like a little stiff because
Sure.
I certainly wasn't going to be experimenting with things. I wanted to get to something that I knew was correct. And what I find is if I spend time in the shop, give myself time to do all these little unimportant pieces that I can just goof around with, what I find is that I'm much more likely to sort of capture the spark of what I was going for. It may not be 100% correct, but in making something like that, then it's much easier to go to a commission piece for a piece I'm teaching with your magazine and then just tighten it up. Then just kind of fix it up or really decide how you're going to go about making it. The idea being is that initial spark that kind of drove you to make the first piece, hopefully it's still present in that more correct version that you made. So, like, I can't start with a commissioned idea and then take the risks necessary to make the intuitive leaps to get to something which is moving me forward. But I do find if I spend time on projects with no risk to them and take a lot of chances and try a lot of things, that then informs the more correct pieces. And I think that's like a happy medium. So for me, my bliss is getting in the shop by myself with my camera in the bag and my tripod leaned up in the corner and just making something. That's my idea. As I get stressed out and going down and think, wow, maybe I'm done woodworking. Maybe I've lost it. The spark is gone. Okay. And then like one Saturday morning in your shop, it's like, boom, nope, there it is. I was just doing everything except what I wanted to do.
So when you're in your shop, Mike, without your camera running, what are you building? What do you want to build? Like if you had to say there was one thing you want to build, what does Mike Pekovich build?
Unless I need something really specific, I think the form I love right now is basically like a kind of the case on stand form.
Okay. Yep.
There's just so much you can do within that, creatively, design wise, that I don't think I would ever hit the limit. And it's a lot of woodworking in a fairly small package, which is good too. So you're not wasting lumber. And, if I don't have to lift huge 8-quarter live edge boards around in my shop, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Again, it's that idea is, so the case, is it vertical, is it horizontal? And it's always going to have some combination of doors, drawers, shelves, sliding doors, maybe. A lot of those elements that from a design standpoint is super, super challenging and fun. And again, by the time you're done, you just have so much packed into such a small area that to me it's almost, I guess it's almost jewel-like, where you're not trying to rein in a lot of big stuff. You have this sort of a small palette to work with and do a lot of fun. And then, of course, the stand can manifest itself in 100 million different ways. I like that. So, I mean, is that a conscious following in the footsteps of James Crenna, who was like the master of the cabin on stand? I mean, probably yes and no. I mean, I was enamored with James Crenna and his writings when I was in college, although it probably took me 30 years before I actually made a traditional case on stand. I mean, I certainly am not. I'm not working in the style. I'm not doing anything where I want someone to say, "Oh, that's very much in the vein of James Crenna."
But like you said, there's all kinds of different permutations on it.
Yeah.
And I think they end up being friendly pieces too, that, they're not hulking or oppressive like a big case piece can feel.
Very much. Yeah. I think the proportions sort of fit the human scale really well. Yeah. I think for anything I'm making for myself, I would like to be pushing myself forward either with a new detail that I hadn't incorporated into a piece yet or a new technique. That is the problem with sort of staying within a very kind of rigidly limited design form, is that it's a lot of permutations of the same elements, but it's not necessarily moving forward. So in a more recent case on stand, I was using, pieces with octagonal cross sections, and I got into doing some steam bending, and so some really fun techniques, which really help. And the thing about doing my own stuff too is like, you make it fun techniques, which really help. And the thing about doing my own stuff too is like, you make a real piece and say, I wonder how it would look if I had rope panels on the side of this. And it's just like, yeah, but I'm not going to pull the trigger on this. But those pieces I make for myself, again, I'll throw a lot of things on it because I don't know how detailed it is going to work in a real piece until you actually do it and see it, and I can respond to it. And then once I know what effect this element has on a piece, and now that's in my brain as part of the library,
Mm-hmm.
now when I'm building a piece and I'm sort of looking towards a direction, I can say, okay, does this element take me closer to that point, or does it move me further away? Not having tried it, I'm just sort of guessing, like maybe that will kind of help give it that. So, it's a lot of giving yourself kind of the safe space to try a lot of things that may or may not work. I think it's cooking for yourself versus cooking for a crowd.
No.
Yeah.
You try a lot of wacky things cooking for yourself with the idea that you're going to give your relatives at least something good to eat that won't kill them.
Yeah. So as you're working in your shop, Mike, would you consider yourself more of a hand tool user, more of a power tool user, or I hate to use a click word as a hybrid user, but let's use a click word, hybrid woodworker?
Yeah, that's stupid. I know that.
I do too.
I think that it's like you can't do anything with wood with your bare hands. There's always a tool between you and the workpiece, right? So no matter whether the tool has a quote on it or not, it's still a tool. And for me, it goes all the way back to when I was in college. It was all about the design. It was always about realizing a finished project. And I don't care how I got there. I just wanted to get there. And like a lot of people, I was trained on basic machinery techniques and also enough hand tool skills to know how to cut a dovetail or chamfer the edge of the board or something like that. But when I came to find woodworking, after I've been woodworking for quite a while, and I actually, David Welter at College of the Redwoods, we were shooting an article on James Krenov making a hand frame, and David Welter worked there, and we were goofing around, and he gave me his hand frame, and I took a shaving with it, and it was like magic. And I just thought, this is a magic hand frame. This thing is like, and what it was a sharp blade and a hand frame. And it's one of those things where, it's like, oh, that's what this tool is. This is what it can do, and that sort of definitely allow me to introduce more and more handwork into my work. But now it's always, I think, in terms of efficiency. And efficiency doesn't mean as fast as you can. Efficiency means the fastest way to get to the endpoint that you want. And quite frankly, you can make absolutely anything start to finish with hand tools because it's been done. People do that. However, I'm a firm believer that you cannot make absolutely anything with only power tools. I think that power tools are awesome because I don't want to be playing all day to thickness a board or dimension it, but hand tools are 100% essential to get you beyond a certain point in order to get to a level of precision, finesse, a level of finish. If that's where you want to go, hand tools are a necessary part of that. So, and it's just like everybody that I was inspired by all of the people that's sort of the 50s, 60s studio furniture movement, James Prenow, Sam Maloof, George Nakashima, Tate Frid, all the way through Chris Bexford, Garrett Hack, everyone I've been inspired by since working with the magazine. Everybody's machines and hand tools. It just is, and it's no big deal. And it always has been that way. And so it's never been a thing. And so to belatedly at this point in time put a name on it or make it any more important than it is, it's kind of, it's beside the point for me, but, I would say 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, people would apologize for using a hand plane and explain why they're using it. Like they're sort of sheepish about using it. And then the pendulum switched to where it's like people are really sheepish about using a planer or a joiner. Well, it just helps me get to the workbench faster. It's like, it's like don't apologize for anything. Like it's all good. And if you want to start with hand tools and it breaks down a barrier and gets you going quicker and for less money, that's awesome. You want to woodwork and don't want to spend a lot of money, buy a little hook knife and a stool and start making spoons, because that's just as awesome as anything. Mm-hmm. So, it's I'm firmly in the camp of being a hybrid woodworker, but as I mentioned in my book, where it's sort of like, where does the woodworking begin for you? Like, where's the fun begin? Like, I sort of equate it to going on a hike and where's the trail?
Right.
And, I mentioned that for me, I like going on a hike, but I like driving to the trail, which means the heavy, machining, joining, cleaning, table saw, cross-cutting, getting to 4 square boards. And then that's sort of the beginning level for me and other people. It's like, no, I'm in my shop to make shavings because my job is super stressful and being in the shop is that one escape for me. And so I'm not going to waste it by using machines when I could be doing things like that. So, and I understand that 100%. So, it depends on where you're at. What are your intentions? Why are you there? Because very few of us are in the shop making a full-time living at it. So there's other reasons why we're there. And I think that's really important to sort of identify within yourself, why am I here? What am I getting out of it? And then make sure that all of your methods and the way you go about woodworking and what you're making is consistent with why you're there. And I think that's how you're going to get the most out of it. This craft, which is so wonderful, and there's no right answer to anything.
Today's episode is sponsored by Shaper Tools. They're the makers of the Shaper Origin. It's that handheld CNC that brings digital precision to the craft of woodworking. You can tackle joinery, cabinetry, hardware installation, and more with speed and precision. Try it risk-free in your shop for 30 days. Visit shapertools.com to learn more. So let's talk a little bit about your books. How did you go? Like, where did the seed of these books come from?
So the first book I wrote was titled The Why and How of Woodworking. And I think it came about, I had started posting pictures on Instagram. Just because some of my buddies at work were doing it, and I think, Matt Kenny was a good friend of mine woodworking, and he was there. He said, I'm on Instagram and I have like 1,200 followers. And like, that's insane. It's like, I don't want that, but it would be a cool way to let people know when I'm teaching a class. So, so I posted some pictures of some finished pieces of furniture and get started. And then you quickly realize that if I show everything I've ever made, I'm going to run out of posts in a month if I'm trying to do this every day. So I did one of two things. And then, so when I was making, I started taking pictures while I was building. And at Fine Woodworking, as a creative director and former art director, my job was to instruct people how to shoot in the appropriate style for publication in fine woodworking. So it was pretty straight up. It was pretty correct. And getting in my shop, it allowed me to photograph in a much more personal way, a much more evocative way, heavier lights and shadows, kind of less correct, that wouldn't be appropriate for the magazine. So I really found a more personal approach to photography, which for me, I'm not a photographer per se. I'm like the photographer of all things woodworking, because it's just sort of, that's my passion. And through my photography, I want to try to convey the passion of one, to put you in that moment, to say, oh, I'd like to be in that space. I would like to be doing that. Oh, I would like to be making something like that. So, that's what we try to do with the magazine, is like, we need to give people a reason to be in the shop. So this was just sort of that, taking a step further. So I began to photograph as I was building, more personal style. And then when I was making a post, and I didn't really have a new picture, I would just like post an old picture, but then write a couple paragraphs on some semi or completely unrelated topic. And it was just this kind of wake up in the morning in bed, pull out my iPad, and like poop out 2 or 3 paragraphs and hit send and call it good. And that was really, again, I'd written for the magazine, and writing it was such a chore. It's such a difficult thing to do, and you have to write in a certain style and make sure you have periods where they need to be and commas where they need to be. And actually being able to just write out something really quick and post, this sort of allowed me to tap into a more personal style, a way that directly connected more to thoughts I had about woodworking, things that were really important for me in terms of being involved with the craft. So I would say that basically the book was born out of both that experience of being able to talk more intimately about what I was doing, having photographs and a style which was more personal and spoke to my passions for the craft. And then just after, 25 years of being at the magazine, having an understanding of what people were going to the shop for, and understanding the problems and the struggles they're having once they're there, and really wanting to help them along that journey. Like, I know why you're here, and I know why it sucks most of the time. Okay, here's how maybe we can, make your time in the shop a little bit more productive, less stressful, and more enjoyable. So that was kind of the first book. And the other thing I really wanted to talk about was that when we talk about design, or when we're building furniture, we're talking about making something real. So it's like someone comes to your house and they look at something, and if they say, oh, wow, that looks like you could buy it in a store, right? You might be like, oh, you're crazy. But then what they're saying is, oh, it's real. Hey, yeah, I made something real. And I think we have this notion of, it's so hard to build. It takes so much work and effort and time that we want to make sure we come away with something that looks real. But I think a lot of us started out, myself for a while, we didn't really come close to thinking in terms of investing our own creativity or personality in what we're building. And what I wanted to, and when we talk about designing furniture, we're thinking about weird, wild, salmon roof lacquer, or really amazing Michael Fortune studio furniture with all these curves and those, flat surfaces, which is super cool. But I wanted to talk about the notion of design really from the standpoint of just investing a little bit of who you are into the work that you're making. Like that's it. Just, you read a book and like you're not supposed to, combine 17 different tropical hardwoods into one project. But you know what? If you really want to do it, go for it. That's what you should be doing. And don't worry about it, and don't worry about what anybody says. So, the book was hopefully to get people to identify why they're in their shop and work more consistently towards that, and also hopefully empower them to think in terms of making work, which is a more personal reflection of who they are. Because we all can't make, a lot of grandiose stuff, but we all are fully capable making things that resonate with the people that we are. And it's a handcrafted thing. Like, we make it from scratch, so we don't need to be putting up these, pedestals of it have to look like this in order to be good. It's like, you're making it, it's already good. Just make it the way you want to make it. So that was that. And in order to write that book, I basically had to leave out about 95% of actually telling you how to make furniture. And I felt kind of bad about that. So I knew, like, with the second book, and I kind of sold it to my publisher, because they were very patient with me, and they gave me a lot of latitude, which was nice, but they really didn't have an idea of what I wanted this book to be. But they knew I was really passionate about it, and I think it was easier for them to say, yeah, just go ahead and make it, Mike, and we're good. But I promised them, I said, the first book, I said, I don't care if only one person buys it as long as they like it. My publisher's like, no, we need to sell this to more than one person. I said, well, okay. The first book is hopefully a book where it's a book you discover by someone handing it to you. Like, oh, you're interested in woodworking? Read this. The second book, I wanted to sort of fulfill the promise of teaching you how to do stuff. So it's really much more nuts and bolts. It starts off with basic joinery, rabbets, bailies, and grooves. It moves on to motors and tenons, dovetails, and miters. But I didn't want a book just about how to cut this joint, how to cut this joint, how to cut this joint, and it leaves everything in a vacuum. What I wanted to do is try to connect the dots for you that the basic joinery, those are your building blocks. You need to know how to perform these very basic things, which are easy to do, but you also need to know how to combine them into building what you want to make. So it's like, okay, how do I put all of these to use to make a piece of furniture in a sound and smart way? And then the third thing was, okay, now that I have this final plan and know exactly where it is, where do I start? And that's I find that it's a higher level thing that a lot of people don't think about, don't have the bandwidth to think about. They're really struggling to cut a dovetail, but it's super important. Some very, very simple concepts like mark your parts so they don't get mixed up. Understand that, what the critical dimensions are and what the critical dimensions aren't. And don't worry about that stuff, but having that path from start to finish, once you know how to build, is a huge part of whether you're having fun in the shop, whether you're doing good work, and you're happy with what you're making. So it's sort of ambitious, but it was the sort of the basic building blocks, how to assemble them into a skeleton or framework, and then how do you plot a course from beginning to end, which doesn't leave you working yourself into a corner or staring at your bench top for half an hour to decide what to do next, only to, after having done that, realize, ooh, I should have done that first. Yeah, so that's book number 2.
Yeah, which I thought was interesting because I feel like you said, a lot of joinery books end up kind of leaving you hanging. It's a choose your own adventure novel with no story really to it, and you don't know where to go with it, and there's no context, and it's like, I don't even know what, like, I want to do a miter, but there's 8 ways to do this. What am I going to do?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that is the toughest thing, is to write any woodworking book. The idea isn't figuring out what you want to say, but it's figuring out all the things you need to not say or leave out in order to get to the really important parts. It's like, and I think that's a lesson I've learned over and over and over again at fine woodworking, because it's like, okay, here's how to build a cherry highboy in 8 pages. Oh, okay, well, we're not milling lumber. So you're not telling me how to dovetail a drawer.
Right.
Then again, it's like, okay, now we have a 2-page article on how to cut a dovetail. Okay, now we can go super deep and tell you all this. So I think any book that begins, sort of in earnest by saying, I'm going to start from the beginning and tell you everything you need to know about woodworking, and you won't even get to step 2 before you're like 300 pages into the book. So I think it's the ability to know what you're after, make sure you talk about that, and hopefully offer the illusion that you didn't skip too much to get there. But understanding that there's a whole lot more that you can go into from that point. Yeah.
Because what I really liked is, and I actually got both of your books as Christmas gifts when they came out. The why and how woodworking, I thought came across to me as like 50% James Krenov's books and like 50% Aldo Leopold's Sand County Almanac.
Oh.
And as just an appreciation for the time and tools spent in your shop. And it was really fun for me to be able to read that. And you're right, the second one felt like an extended, like this is the appendix to that book, that these are the how-tos, and that one felt more like the very best cookbook on a specific, say, regional cuisine, where these are the elements of that cuisine, and now it's up to you to mix and match those, and in the end it's going to be an Italian dish or a Mexican dish or American Southern cooking, so long as you can master these components.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's a good way to describe it. In that the first book for me hopefully inspired you to want to get out to the shop, and in the second book, my vision was, with this book, walking into the shop, with this book, I can go into the shop and make whatever I want. I didn't want it to be, with this book, I can go into the shop and make furniture that looks like Mike Pekovich. That wasn't the point at all. And the first book, because it was about, trying to explain how to get to a very personal design style, it out of necessity had to feature the work that I had been designing to be able to talk about it. And so the second book is much more open. So that's why you see an arts and crafts display case in there. It's why you see a chimney cover. It's why you see an arts and crafts squatter. The idea being that this isn't about building in a specific style. It's just about building. And the idea is that all of these things apply to whatever you're making there. So, yeah, that's the idea of it.
Yeah. Now I have a specific question regarding Logan, because he's going to be building a shop here pretty soon, and you've been living in your shop for quite a while. The walls of your shop, are they straight up drywall? Do you have plywood behind there?
The walls of my shop, it's a cinder block building. And because, there was just zero insulation, I actually framed out basically an interior wall with studs on the inside, filled that in with rigid insulation in between the studs, and then drywall on top of that. So it was a really small shop to begin with. It was about 19 by 19 for the interior space, and I lost, probably another foot. It's probably about 18 by 18, but that was worth it. And then I have, because I live in Connecticut, I hired someone to come in and do this spray the expanding foam insulation on the bottom of the roof between the rafters. And that worked out really well. I mean, for me, it was just like, can I get to the point where it's tight enough to where I can afford to heat it? Because when I came to Connecticut, and it was just like, in California, everybody's wood shop is in their garage. So it's just like, why is everybody shopping in their basement? That sounds horrible. And then I set up in my garage, and here came November, and said, all right. So I got a heater, and I blew through like 100-gallon tank of propane in a month. And it never got above like 45 degrees. So it's like, okay, that's not going to work. So for me, it's getting a super tight space that I can heat adequately. It's a super small space, but I did raise the ceiling from about 7 feet and change to over 9 feet, and that That's a huge thing. I think I would probably rather forego a smaller footprint as long as I had a taller ceiling.
Yep.
That was what I was thinking. So Logan, what kind of shop, what kind of space do you have that you're going to be building out?
So when I built my house a couple of years ago, I finished my entire basement, but I left about a 14 by 24 foot unfinished that I finished as my shop. So Phil and I were talking before we started the podcast.
Oh, cool.
I have right now, when I framed my shop, I did like 7/16 OSB underneath the drywall, so I can hang stuff wherever I want. But I drywalled it.
Awesome. Yeah.
I drywalled it because my ultimate plan was to build a shop, outside of the house. My plan was to turn what is currently my shop space into a theater room, and now my kids are that age that they're wanting they're like, hey, when can we get a movie room? And I'm asking my wife, hey, when can I build a shop? so yeah, we're going to be putting up up here in the Midwest, Morton buildings or machine sheds are very popular, pole barns. So it will be a large building, a 40 by 88 building, but about half of it will be shop. So it'll be about a 1,600 square foot shop. So I was telling Phil, I was like, do I just drywall the whole thing? Do I plywood it and paint it? What do I do? Because that's a lot of interior space to put stuff on.
Yeah. So. Are you still thinking about that right now, or you have it figured out?
No, I think we'll see what sheet good prices are like. That's what it will all boil down to. Right. To be honest with you, right. I was telling Phil, somebody on Facebook had a bunch of like OSB or MDF. It was actually MDF for cheap, and I was like, I could MDF behind it and then drywall over top of it. But that just sounds miserable, and I don't hang sheet goods in a building. I hire that out. I hate doing that. So So no, I'm probably still planning on. I like the ability to be able to hang stuff wherever I want it and not worry about hitting studs, especially in a pole barn building where you have 8 foot on center 6x6 beams or poles, and then you have horizontal girts. You don't have horizontal, or you have horizontal girts. You don't have vertical studs, which makes I would have to wrap my head around trying to hang stuff on that anyways. Like, oh hey, it doesn't run this way; it runs this way. So
yes,
one of those things.
Huh. Well, what kind of stuff? I mean, that's going to be a pretty big shop. What kind of woodworking do you envision yourself doing in there?
So my goal is to move a lot of the current popular woodworking photography and video out there. So, as you know, once you start adding lights and adding cameras, that eats up a lot of space. I'm very much a modern shaker fanboy. That's what I love building. And I'm a avid turner, so there will be a large corner of the shop just for turning.
Cool.
But yeah, it's more to have that space for cameras, for lights, have an office, have a bathroom in there, stuff like that.
Nice. Yeah, so you know what your sight lines need to be. Here's the table saw. This is where I want to shoot from. This is what I want in the background.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's like stuff that I never thought when I was building a shop I'd need to consider.
Yes. Yeah, it's like where the camera is facing, with my workbench and window and a tool cabinet. That's the only part of the shop which is like photogenic. The rest is like a disaster. So you got to be strategic.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, we always talk about I think every woodworking publication has said it at one point, put your bench against the window so you get good light coming through. And I'm thinking, all right, that means I have one wall I could put my bench against, because otherwise I'm looking at my house or I'm looking at my neighbor's house. The other window at least is the timber. You know what I mean? So it's like I have one good backdrop, and that's where the bench has to go. So, yeah.
Right. And then if your bench is facing a window, you can't be shooting at your back or past you all the time. So I've got my table saw outfeed table outfitted as a second bench. So I'm actually working there for the most part. and you see my real bench in the background, and it looks wonderful. But if you pay attention, you realize that I'm spending 90% of the time working on not my workbench. But
yes,
tricks of the trade.
Yeah. Well, it's funny.
So
it's. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, you had mentioned the term modern shaker.
Yeah.
Explain that to me. That sounds pretty cool. I think I know what you're talking about.
So basically what I do is if my wife asks me to build something, I hand her a Thomas Mosher catalog and say, pick something.
Okay. Very good. Very wise. Yes. The illusion of choice. Yes.
Exactly. Yes. Because her and I have very different styles. I love traditional forms. She likes modern stuff. You know, if I could make everything out of poplar and paint it, she would be so happy. But I refuse to do it. So some stuff, sure, some stuff, great. If that's what I'm going for. But yeah, I love the shaker forms. I love everything about it. So.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And shaker's kind of funny because, shaker furniture they were sort of riffing off of federal furniture, but just stripping it down to just like nothing, just to the solid wood. And then a lot of the mid-century Danish makers were looking at shaker furniture as an inspiration. So it's really funny how it's like modern furniture, kind of shaker furniture was sort of the first truly kind of postmodern style of furniture, and then it went to kind of Denmark and then back to us, and now it's sort of back to shaker and modern shaker. Yeah, I think it is. But it is important to please the client, no matter who your client is or whether they're paying or not. That's a really important thing.
Yeah, for sure. Now, it's funny. It's something Phil and I talk about a lot here, and I'm interested to hear if you have the same thing. Is your woodworking on camera different than your woodworking for yourself? Like, do you find it is just, to us, if we're building something in front of a camera, or for whether it's for photography, whether it's for video, it's a whole different sense to the project than if it's just you at your bench. Do you find that same thing?
Here's actually one of the biggest influences on the way I work. I would say in the past, I would really have to edit how I did things if it was going to be printed in the magazine versus how I might do it when nobody was looking. What I found is that when I started teaching a lot, and I've been teaching pretty consistently for the last 10 years, is that, I would just, this is how I do it in my shop, and then I would tell students how to do it, and everything would blow up and fall apart. And so it's like, oh, wait, let me refigure that. Or I would do something in my shop and feel, that's not really the safest way to do it. When I go to a class, I'm going to do it this way instead. So there was the way I worked and then the way I taught. And what had happened is when you actually spend 10 minutes to figure out the safest way to do something, it turns out to be it's probably the best way to do it too. So a lot of those techniques that I developed specifically for teaching, I use myself in my own shop, which of course is a one-to-one correlation between the way I teach and the methods I would use as I'm writing an article or a book. So it's gotten to the point where there's less of a disconnect. So now, for the most part, whatever I'm doing on camera in a video is the way I would do it, minus 5% of the stuff. Where it's like,
that's fair.
Tenons,
That's fair.
If you need a tenon, you're just going across the blade. We're good. Nothing super sketchy, but things like it's like there are things you do and what you do and what you tell other people to do are often not the same. But I would say, and I think. As a good thing, I think I'm getting closer to the way I work. I think is for the most part, it's pretty. Yeah, this is how I would recommend other people to do this well.
Sure, I feel as I'm working. for photos and stuff, it's like I'm always rushing to get parts together so a photographer's not standing around, and I'm paying a photographer not to, to stand around while I'm working on something. And, it's just, it feels like there's always a much calmer, like I'm in my shop, I don't have to worry about pleasing anybody, and it's just different.
Yeah. I think that's the thing is, if I have a staff photographer come out and shoot something, like if we're doing a video and Ben is coming out to shoot that, and we've got 3 days, I have mock-up parts in like 5 different stages, and it's just like boom, boom, okay, this is done. It's like, you put the chicken in the oven and you pull out the finished chicken. It's that sort of thing. It's super plain. Yeah. The good thing now is that my wife does a lot of my photography. Actually, she does pretty much all of my print photography along with me. And so it's now I'm working in real time, and it's just like, okay, stop, come out, let's get these pictures, or if I have to, I'll set up a camera with out of remote to get a shot. And so now I would say I photograph in a tremendously inefficient way, because it's like, get a shot, wait for 2 hours, get another shot.
Yep.
And but I really like that. In fact, my like my books, it's like you cannot go out and make that book by scheduling a photo shoot with an author.
No.
Because the photos are span weeks or months, and that's what I like. That's why I'm super proud of. It's this object, it's this finished product, which is created in a way which is frankly impossible to create any other way. And that's kind of a cool thing. But yeah, I like photography. It's a burden, but I'm sure you feel the same way as when you're photographing. It really forces you to really think about what you're doing it and why you're doing it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It also makes you realize how awkwardly you can hold stuff for a photo to make it look good. It's like, nope, rotate your hand a little bit unnaturally so it looks better.
Yeah. It's funny, like the authors we work with on a more regular basis, they just know the pose. They're just like boom, boom. Like a carver, a professional carver who's really going at it, man, they're flicking that chip off the chisel all the time to see what they're doing. We just want to get stop, don't, Whereas other people, they just know how long to get the curl, get the hand up away from the blade, hold still, take the shot, and keep on going. Yeah. Unfortunately, we've broken a few authors so that they now. No, it's this notion of, and it's really hard, especially during a glue up. It's this notion of, excuse me, we're not making a piece of furniture here. We're making a magazine article.
Exactly.
An article. Yes.
Yeah. That's funny.
That of course doesn't fly if you're there and this person. Yes, but yeah.
That's funny. So, Mike, what is if you were gonna pick one wood species to bring with you on a desert island that you're making furniture with for the rest of your career, what wood species is it? And I'm doing this to you because I think Ben did this exact same thing to us. So, payback.
Oh. Yeah, no. I won't say what I said to Ben when he asked me that on the podcast. I think I said, that's a stupid question. It's...
Okay, what's your favorite? What is your favorite
So if
thing
I'm on a desert island, what kind of shop would I have on a desert island? Okay, so if I had like one wood to work with, I think off the top of my head, rather than trying to grasp at something unexpected, I would probably say white oak.
Okay. Just
because, it's a great color, it's a great workability, it has so many personalities, whether it's rift on, which is super straight and quiet, you can get like a really golden color to a really wild quarter sawn figure, and it fits my style. I don't consider my style to be primitive as in crude, but I do consider it to be maybe more elemental.
Sure.
So, and I think white oak, there's just a certain mass to it. It takes a chamfer really, really well. It takes shapes pretty well, but obviously if you have really ornate carving, it's going to fun. Yeah, I think white oak, because I'm so used to it, and I understand if I start to work in cherry or walnut for too long, and then I come back to white oak, it's like, why am I doing this? But you don't have a choice. That's all. That would be good. So my, other woods that might be up there could be ash.
Okay.
I love ash. I've been working with that a lot. I really like butternut. Just again, I like those classic medium tone colors. Cherry would be good, but cherry is so about cherry that
Right.
I think it would really drive. I think every wood is going to pull you in a certain direction design-wise. So, like, I couldn't just make everything I normally make in cherry. I would just be going, I'm just off in cherry, and all my stuff is going to look like that. So, I would say white oak and ash are probably the closest to what I'm doing right now, to where they're not going to pull me too far in a different direction. And I don't think I'm going to get there. What was your answer, Logan?
Walnut, without a doubt. I mean, having
walnut.
Yeah, I mean, and I completely understand that I'm spoiled having a sawmill, living on 5 acres of old growth walnut trees. I mean, I'm spoiled, so I love it. That's what everything in my house is made out of. Love it.
Yeah, that's a pretty terrible answer. Well, old
I know it is.
walnut
I
from my
know.
property that I saw myself.
Yeah, I know. I feel dirty after saying it. I know.
I can definitely see that. Like, we did come across a local sawyer who'd sawn up some walnut, and it was all air dried. And you're so used to resawing kiln dried stock and having it go like this and like this. And I was resawing some air dried walnut into like 3/16 veneers, and it just like plopped off dead flat. Yeah, it's like the one time if you accidentally find yourself flying first class, it's just going to ruin you for every other flight after that where you're flying kites. I can see that. No, do you have a?
I was saying,
do you have
a
kiln set up, or are you?
I don't. I don't have a kiln. I have a buddy of mine that lives probably 15 minutes away from me that has a kiln. So I send a lot of my stock down to him. If I need to dry it faster, I always prefer air dried if I can. Especially with walnut. I mean, putting walnut in a kiln it's terrible. It's like baking cookies instead of just eating the cookie dough. Like, I was telling Phil, I do understand the oak thing though. I had been sawing a lot of oak last summer and quarter sawing a lot of it, and I just loved it. I don't know why. And it is actually ready to use now. So that I might pivot a little bit. Yeah. So.
Yeah, oak and walnut get along pretty well together.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll do like a lot of oak case work, but it might have like walnut interiors, walnut doors. Yeah, I like those. So, like, where do you live? And do you have like motion sensors around your lumber stuck in your yard? Is it something like it just?
You can come out and pick my lumber anytime you want, Mike.
Awesome. Okay. All right.
All right. Let's see. Well, one other question that I had for you, Mike, was a lot of times woodworking has a reputation of being kind of an old man's sport, but you've been practicing for a while, and Logan and I are still in the thick of it. But talk about being and incorporating being a woodworker while being a parent. Because I know that for me, I have to be in my shop routinely if I'm going to be the best parent that I can be.
It's a life balance is a super important thing, and some of my, a lot of my students are, pre-retirement, post-retirement, but now we're getting like the 30-somethings. Usually, it's a woodworker who maybe has a house and a shop, with space to be able to have a shop, and they probably have 1 or 2 little kids, which means they can't be on the golf course for 5 hours, but you can be in your wood shop 50 feet away, and that's still okay. So. And everybody is kind of bemoaning the fact that they don't have, the time they want to have in a shop. And I found that working with woodworkers of all ages, anything you can do to get a start in woodworking, even if it's just banging plywood together or it's getting in the shop when you can to make an own project, all of that is a really good head start, and it's going to inform your woodworking abilities when you do eventually get the time to be in the shop more, which you will. But I think to wait until, say, oh, I just retired, I want to take up woodworking because I had a class in high school and I really liked it. It's like, that's a tough go. That's really tough. And I would just say, anything you can, get in there, I've always just, it's a balance. It's just trying to keep as many of those plates spinning on the poles as you can. And every now and then one wobbles, you got it with that. And when they're all going, you can run out into the shop and get something done. Yeah, it's obviously there's a little bit of reservation in guilt, or should I really be out here in the shop? But I think woodworking, it's a craft. It's a really, really important thing, and I think spending a couple hours in your shop making something as opposed to some time on the golf course, which I like to golf. It's not a bad thing, but there's I think something more significant with spending your time in the shop, and it's just get in there what you can, build as often as you can without compromising the happiness of your household, and it's all going to add up, and it's all going to be a really good investment, and later on for when you do get up and running. Yeah, that's all good.
Yeah, cool. Well, I appreciate you having you on, Mike. We're a little over an hour here. Mike's books are The Why and How of Woodworking and The Foundations of Woodworking. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, or you can check out our show notes page, we'll have links to being able to pick up those books, and also some other links for connecting with Mike and following him on the Instagrams and the internet, and with his work at Fine Woodworking Magazine. Wanted to say thanks again to Shaper Tools for sponsoring today's episode. They make that handheld CNC router. I'm sure you've seen it. It adds digital precision to your woodworking. Do all kinds of stuff with it: joinery, cabinetry, hardware installation. It adds speed and precision to your woodworking, and they have an offer now where you can have it in your shop for 30 days. You can check it out at shapertools.com to learn more. Well, thanks again, Mike, for joining us, and happy woodworking.